What if the line between the ledger and the void were thinner than you thought? What if a hidden stack of ledgers existed, running parallel to every bank account, every credit card, every blockchain, and the people who kept it in mind were the invisible movers of the world's wealth? Imagine stumbling into a world where money doesn't simply flow, whispers, bends, and sometimes refuses to obey the ordinary rules of supply and demand. Eliot Parkin was 32, a barista in a cramped coffee shop on a street that smelled perpetually of roasted beans and cheap printer ink. His rent, his students' loan payments, the 2-week-old credit card bill that threatened a slice of his modest savings all hung like a heavy sour note over his shoulders. He'd spent the last 2 years juggling shifts and a nighttime tutoring gig, never really making enough to keep the apartment from being a temporary sanctuary. One rainy Tuesday, after a customer cursed at him for a latte gone wrong, Eliot walked home beneath a flickering street lamp that threw a halo of light on the wet pavement. In the corner of his eye, something moved. A quick flash of silver over the edge of a bus stop, a smear of oil on the asphalt that glistened like a coin. He stopped, puzzled. That is when he saw the note. It was thin, a single line printed in a font that seemed almost handwritten, the parallel ledger. Look beneath the surface. A. He laughed aloud, the sound raw. He kept it tucked inside his jacket, almost as if it were a relic from some game. The note was his first contact with a world that didn't seem to exist in any map. That night, with the coffee shop's hum fading into the background, he stared at the page. What if there was a way to make money without working? What if the system itself was a puzzle, and the pieces were out there, hidden beneath the familiar? His mind spun, and curiosity grew like a tide. He pulled out his phone, opened a search engine, and typed parallel ledger, hidden wealth, financial loophole. The internet returned a slew of forums where people whispered about offshore accounts, tax havens, and cryptic algorithms. Nothing concrete, just rumors and a handful of screenshots. The note sat on the nightstand as a promise, a question that had no immediate answer. Eliot decided to find out. He took a leave of absence from the shop for the next week, using his last savings to rent a cheap room in an apartment building 2 blocks away. He started his investigation at the most unassuming of places, a university economics library that had been shuttered for a week due to renovation. The stack smelled of dust and old paper. He found a book by a reclusive economist, Dr. Lillian Carr, titled Invisible Capital. The book's spine was cracked, the cover faded, but inside, in the margin of a chapter, someone had written a note. The ledger runs behind the ledger. The wealthy don't look at the front, they look beneath. That phrase felt like a breadcrumb. He spent days poring over pages, his coffee growing cold beside him. He noticed patterns in the language, references to off-ledger, shadow balances, parallel transactions, and a recurring mention of the consortium known as the Syndicate. This was a group that moved money in ways that the public eye never saw. He began to suspect that the parallel ledger was a sophisticated system that the Syndicate used to hide their wealth. The next day, while sipping a lukewarm espresso in a back corner, a man approached him. His eyes were the color of stormy sea. He wore a tattered blazer and held a small battered notebook that smelled of ink and old wood. "You're looking for the ledger?" he said, voice low. "I'm Alex, a ghost of sorts. I used to walk the halls of the system. I can show you the road, but it's not a path I'd recommend." He spoke of a secret algorithm that could create a shadow entry that masked every real entry, effectively mirroring transactions without recording them on the public ledger. The result? Money that existed in a parallel dimension, untouchable by auditors, yet available for the holder to use at will. Eliot was skeptical but intrigued. He followed Alex's instructions, downloading encrypted files, decrypting old email exchanges between former consortium members, and compiling data that pointed to a series of offshore shell companies that held trillions in shadow balances. He began to test small amounts, siphoning fractions of a euro into a shadow account, watching the account's balance update in real time while the bank statement remained unchanged. The first experiment was a gamble. He wrote a small program, a script that would create a shadow entry each time he withdrew money from his savings account. When the next day arrived, the script had recorded an entry in the parallel ledger. The balance had risen while his bank account had stayed the same. He could now see the proof, a number in a separate database that did not appear on any public record. Success felt like a drug. He began to rely less on coffee shop wages and more on the secret, steady trickle of wealth that flowed from the shadow ledger. The money came in like a slow tide, depositing into his bank account on a whim with no work required. It paid his rent, the credit card debt that had once loomed like a monster, and gave him a buffer he'd never imagined. However, the shadow ledger was not without its cracks. In his curiosity, Eliot stumbled on a clause in one of the offshore company's bylaws. If the ledger detects a balance that deviates from the standard ratio of 1:1 between real and shadow entries, the system will lock the account. It was a safeguard against abuse, a warning that the system could turn against its own users. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He was playing with a tool that could turn on him if he overstepped. At the same time, the world around him began to change. People he'd known started asking about his sudden financial upswing. He became a reluctant hero for his friends, sharing tips about budgeting while keeping the secret hidden. Yet with each new person he trusted, the risk of detection multiplied. He began to feel the weight of the syndicate's gaze. One night, a notification pinged on his phone, a message from an unknown number. "We know what you're doing," it read. "Stop or it's over." The message was cryptic, but its implications were clear. The syndicate was aware of a new player in the shadows. Eliot realized that he was not just a barista, but a threat to the powerful consortium that had built this hidden system to keep their fortunes out of reach. He had a choice. He could continue to grow his wealth, risk exposure, and maybe become a part of the elite. Or he could destroy the ledger, destroy the tool that had given him a second chance. The weight of the decision pressed upon him. He sat at his small kitchen table, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting in his eyes. The ledger's numbers ticked like a heartbeat, each digit a reminder of what could be lost. He thought of his mother, who had been ill and had never been able to pay the hospital bills. He thought of the coffee shop's manager, who had given him a second chance after the latte incident. He thought of the moral cost. The rich would lose a convenient source of wealth, but society would also lose the ability to redistribute that wealth covertly to those in need. At dawn, he wrote a code that would unlink all shadow entries, effectively wiping the ledger clean. He ran it. The system blinked, a cascade of zeros, replacing the numbers that had once been his secret fortune. The accounts he had created for himself and his friends disappeared into the void. The bank balances remained unchanged. He had returned the world to the status quo, but the memory of the shadow ledger lingered like a phantom. The next morning, he walked into the coffee shop. The manager asked him if he was feeling okay. Eliot nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd done. He poured a latte, the steam curling into the cold air. He thought of the consortium, the powerful elite who had built a system that could hide wealth from a world that was supposed to be transparent. He wondered if he had done the right thing, or if he had just handed over a tool that could have been used for good. Later that night, as the city lights flickered like distant stars, he stared at the nightstand where the note from the bus stop lay. He remembered the words of Dr. Karp, the cryptic scribbles that had led him to this point. He realized that the ledger was more than a financial system. It was a reflection of human nature. Wealth had always been a mirror, a symbol of power, a source of comfort, a temptation that could corrupt or uplift. The parallel ledger existed because some saw money as a game, a puzzle to be solved. Others saw it as a responsibility to be shared. Eliot had lived the experience of both. In the end, he closed his laptop, turned off the lights, and walked into the night. He did not have a solution for the world's inequities, but he had a small piece of truth. The line between wealth and worth was often defined by the choices people made, not the numbers in a ledger. When the next morning's coffee arrived, it was ordinary, hot, bitter, and ordinary. Yet, for the first time, Eliot tasted it not as a means to a financial end, but as a simple reminder that some truths do not need to be hidden. The city around him would continue to hum, its money flowing in and out of ledgers both visible and unseen. The parallel ledger had vanished from his life, but the question remained, how would we, the ordinary people, shape the world when the powerful can hide their wealth in shadows? He walked away, the bus stop note tucked into his pocket, a silent question hanging in the air, awaiting the next curious mind.
Found this interesting? Subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it out, and drop your questions or ideas in the comments. Until our next adventure.